The air in the substation hums, thick with ozone and the ghosts of old circuits. Dust motes dance in the single neon tube's sickly green glow, outlining stacks of hand-labeled vinyl. Below the console, a patched-up transmitter radiates a heat that smells like hot metal and stubborn defiance.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Kirribilli checks in at 65 degrees and light rain shower. Wind check, north at 9 miles an hour. Tonight, we open with a tense situation in Southern California, where an explosion threat at a chemical tank near Carson had thousands on edge. Firefighters eventually eliminated the danger, but the close call lays bare a fragility in our industrial infrastructure.
Indeed, Togee. Concrete facts. Residents within a half-mile radius of a Marathon Petroleum refinery in Carson, Los Angeles County, faced mandatory evacuation orders due to an overpressurized storage tank containing butadiene, a highly flammable chemical. Emergency crews spent hours cooling the tank and flaring off its contents to prevent a catastrophic explosion. This put over 2,500 people directly in harm's way, alongside a dozen first responders from the LA County Fire Department.
The exposure here isn't just physical, it's a deep breach of trust for the communities living adjacent to these petrochemical giants. We see the legacy of environmental injustice, where low-income and minority neighborhoods disproportionately bear the risk. It evokes the shadow of Bhopal, a stark reminder of industrial vulnerability.
A viable alternative to this reactive crisis management would be mandating independent, real-time sensor networks across all such facilities, publicly accessible, combined with a community-led oversight board empowered to trigger immediate shutdowns for safety breaches. This shifts power from corporate self-regulation to local consent.
So, for Carson, our next move experiment, we're calling for a public audit of all high-risk chemical facilities across California, specifically demanding transparent safety records and clear, actionable community-driven emergency plans that favor preemptive measures over post-incident responses. A faint crackle underscores the distant city drone. Patching in a caller, the devil's advocate. You're on the signal.
While safety is paramount, these facilities are vital for the economy. Is it realistic to expect perfect safety or to place such heavy burdens on industry? Isn't some level of calculated risk acceptable for the jobs and products these plants provide?
Switching frequencies. Next signal. India's government orders handover of exclusive Delhi Gymkhana. A valid challenge, asking us to weigh immediate returns against enduring community health. You highlight a common perception that jobs from a retail complex equate to universal prosperity. But prosperity isn't just about transactions. It's also about resilience and self-determination.
This isn't about eliminating industry. It's about demanding a structural reevaluation of its social contract. The calculated risk is borne disproportionately by residents, not the executives.
The real cost of a major incident, beyond human lives, would dwarf any economic benefits. Investing in safety measures, even if initially expensive, is a long-term economic stabilizer for the entire region. It builds provenance, not just profit.
Our call for public audits isn't just idealistic. It's about leveraging data and collective intelligence to build better systems. Quantifying risk transparently allows communities to consent to or reject the architectures imposed upon them.
Precisely. We're discerning the architectural signal of genuine community from the noise of short-term financial gain. The autonomy of a neighborhood to feed itself, to gather, to breathe, that's foundational self-worth. It's not contingent on a quarterly report. Moving from local hazards to global ethics, let's pivot. From a physical explosion threat to a political one. In Australia, a Labour MP openly challenged Defence Minister Richard Marles over the government's support for the Israeli government, exposing deep internal rifts.
Concrete facts. Senator Fatima Payman, a Labour MP, publicly criticized the Albanese government's stance, specifically Marles's defense of Australia's support for Israel amidst the Gaza conflict. She invoked international humanitarian law and human rights, stating her position was on behalf of the people of Palestine. This public dissent, rare for a sitting government member, occurred following a contentious party room meeting where divisions were palpable.
This exposes the Australian Labor government to accusations of hypocrisy, trying to balance traditional alliances with evolving progressive values. It also exposes Senator Payman to potential party sanctions, yet she carries the lineage of global solidarity movements, speaking truth to power from within. The question of who defines dignity in foreign policy becomes central.
A viable alternative for the Labor government would be to adopt a more balanced, independent foreign policy, perhaps by recognizing Palestinian statehood or advocating for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire, thereby aligning policy with stated human rights principles and a significant portion of its voter base. This would re-establish provenance in its ethical claims.
For this internal challenge, our next move experiment, we encourage Australian citizens to directly engage their local MPs, not just on domestic issues, but on foreign policy, demanding a clear articulation of how national values of justice and human rights translate into international action. Signal coming in.
Isn't it destabilizing for a government to have its members openly contradicting policy? Surely, a unified front on foreign policy is crucial for national interest, even if it means some internal discomfort?
Unity can be a strength, but not when it stifles essential discernment. We're talking about a structural question. Is monolithic consent for foreign policy truly robust, or does it become brittle without internal challenge?
Suppressing dissent often masks a lack of conviction or a flawed policy. True strength comes from integrating varied perspectives, not silencing them.
The national interest is not a static monolith. It evolves with the conscience of its people. Senator Payman's challenge isn't destabilizing. It's an architectural signal, forcing the system to account for its ethical foundations.
And our call for citizen engagement isn't about chaos. It's about building a more resilient civic architecture where foreign policy is informed by a broad spectrum of voices, not just a few at the top. This translates tension into direct democratic pressure.
Exactly. This is about ensuring foreign policy reflects the provenance of our shared values, not just the dictates of power. We seek to integrate logic and emotion, not as rivals, but as complementary vectors in defining a nation's soul. Now, let's shift focus to a different kind of power struggle, one rooted in history and privilege. Same dossier, new angle, keep the thread tight.
Concrete facts? India's Ministry of Corporate Affairs, through the National Company Law Tribunal, NCLT, ordered the handover of the Delhi Gymkhana Club to a government-appointed administrator. This follows years of allegations involving financial mismanagement, illegal memberships, and violations of company law, including a failure to function as a non-profit entity. The club, a relic of the British Raj, had an almost mythical status among India's elite.
This exposes the entrenched power of India's old guard, who for decades operated this institution with an almost sovereign disregard for regulatory oversight. The move is a symbolic dismantling of colonial-era privilege, asserting the dignity of democratic governance over inherited status. It's the state reclaiming a piece of its own provenance.
A viable alternative to direct government takeover could involve a court-mandated, time-bound reform process led by an independent judicial committee, forcing the club to democratize its membership, open its financials, and allocate a percentage of its facilities for public use, rather than a full administrative seizure. This would allow for internal restructuring under external pressure.
For the Delhi Gymkhana Club situation, our next move experiment, we call on civic groups in India to map other similar exclusive institutions still operating under opaque colonial-era rules, documenting their public land use, financial structures, and historical privileges to expose any unaccountable architectures.
Isn't this government overreach? A private club, however exclusive, should manage its own affairs. This feels like state interference targeting specific social classes, potentially setting a dangerous precedent for other private institutions.
This challenge prompts us to ask, what defines private when an institution benefits from public land, historical context, and operates with structures arguably designed to exclude. We're examining the structural integrity.
Private doesn't equate to unaccountable. When a private entity is found in violation of corporate law and managing public trust assets, intervention becomes a matter of upholding the rule of law.
This isn't about targeting a class. It's about discerning between legitimate private association and the perpetuation of an undemocratic colonial-era architecture that undermines the dignity of a sovereign nation. The myth of untouchable privilege is being challenged.
And our mapping project isn't about a witch hunt. It's about transparency and consent. If these institutions are built on public resources or historical grants, their continued operation requires democratic scrutiny, not just inherited status. It makes the system playable for all.
Precisely. We're asserting unwavering autonomy, not just for individuals, but for the collective civic space. Self-worth is structural, not contingent on antiquated, unexamined privilege. We integrate sharp discernment to separate toxic residue from architectural signal.
Prototype the fix.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.